What's up guys? My name is Richmond and I'm the OT Dude. Today we will talk about sensory processing and what is sensory processing disorder. Sensory processing, or formally sensory integration, is the ability of our body to register and modulate sensory information from the environment entering our body, and then processing and organizing that sensory information in our brain to produce an adaptive or appropriate response. But wait, sensory information? What is that? Good question. Sensory information comes from the different sensory systems of our body. Are you familiar with the 5 senses? I know you are! What is it again? It's what you see, what you smell, what you taste, what you hear, and what you touch or feel. But there are 2 other sensory systems that's not widely talked about. The first is proprioceptive system. Proprioception is our position sense. The receptors are located in our joints and muscles. This is in charge of telling our brain the position of our body without us having to look at our body or body parts. For example, I'm in a seated position right now. I don't have to look down to check if I'm sitting down or standing up. Next is the vestibular system. This is our balance system. It's located in our inner ear. This is in charge of telling our brain to maintain an upright position relative to the Earth's gravity. This is why we can maintain this position without losing balance. This is also in charge when we feel dizzy. So how does sensory processing happen? To better understand sensory processing, I will show you a diagram. These are the different sensory stimulus or sensory information that could enter our body. It could be a sound, light, touch, smell, or movement. As it enters our body, our brain would register that information, organize that information, process that information for us to be able to understand that sensory information and for us to produce an adaptive response. One good example is when we accidentally touch a hot object. That sensory information is heat or temperature. Our brain registers that information and then it organizes that information for it to process it, and when it understands that information, it produces an adaptive response. What do we usually do? Remove or withdraw our hand from the hot object. So why is sensory processing important? It is very important to have efficient sensory processing for us to be able to fully participate in our everyday lives and adequately engage in our daily roles and routines. Each individual, like you and me, them, or the kids, respond differently to different sensory information because we all have different thresholds. Some may respond immediately because they have low threshold and are hyper-responsive. They tend to avoid situations wherein there's too much sensory stimulus. Others have high threshold or are hypo-responsive, so they tend to seek sensory input. Basically, there are 3 types. Sensory seeking, they're always on the go and touches everything. Next is sensory avoiding, they're withdrawn and reluctant to move and they avoid touching. Lastly is sensory sensitivity, oversensitive to touch, movement, or light, and they're easily irritated. It is possible to have low threshold for one sensory input and have high threshold for another. It doesn't mean that you're sensitive to one sensory input that you're sensitive in all other sensory inputs. The different threshold levels and our ability to cope depends on many factors and vary day to day. Now, self-regulation or modulation is the ability to manage sensory input to match the demands of our environment. We all have different sensory preferences. There are some people who like wearing bright clothes, while others like wearing dark clothes. Some people enjoy extreme sports or riding extreme rides in the carnival, while others like calm activities. It is important to note that not everybody, like you and me, them, especially the children, have the same level of threshold, and that some children have a hard time processing sensory information. The situation may not be necessarily in sync with your child's sensory needs. Some children have a really hard time processing sensory information. Let's pretend that these scars are the different sensory information that our body receives. The yellow is what we see, the green is what we smell, Purple is what we feel, blue is what we hear, and red is movement. As these cars travel or move through the roads or our nervous system, it is able to move properly if we have efficient sensory processing. Now, typically, a child is able to handle and process noise, lights, and crowds, even if these cars move fast. Now imagine if your child has sensory processing disorder. They can't always handle all the noise, lights, crowds. Too much sensory stimulus causes sensory overload. This usually causes a meltdown. So what are signs of sensory processing disorder? There's decreased social skills. They have the tendency to invade another's personal space. They appear to not listen. They have the tendency to butt into conversations. They have sudden meltdowns. And they have no pattern in behavior. They have difficulty performing daily living skills. They have difficulty wearing certain clothes. They avoid touch. They're messy or picky eaters. They dislike feeding. They have latching issues. And they have problems transitioning into solid food. And they have problems transitioning from bottle to cup, and they also have a hard time with teethers or bottles. They have a hard time sleeping, and they hate loud noises, and they have difficulty engaging in different activities with the appropriate attention span. Next is immature play skills. They avoid messy play, and they have narrow choices for toys, and they jump from one toy to another. Some may have impaired self-concept. They have very low self-esteem. They're reluctant to join in any class activity, and they have unrealistic expectations of themselves and the task. And lastly, there's decreased fine motor and gross motor skills. There's pull pencil grasp. They frequently bump into furniture. They're constantly on the go because they need a lot of movement. They appear to be clumsy and they easily lose their balance. They have high or low muscle tone, and they skip milestones. For example, instead of crawling first, before they stand up and walk, they immediately stand up, and they avoid certain positions because it's uncomfortable for them. Others are unable to jump, and also others are late walkers. They might prefer activities that they don't have to move a lot, or they like activities that they move a whole lot. Now, sensory processing is not a diagnosis. It's an umbrella of symptoms that we classify into a disorder. Now, only a doctor can diagnose sensory processing disorder. An occupational therapist can do assessments, but only a specialist can do thorough evaluations. You need to be certified to do this. So what are some tips to help your child with sensory processing disorders? Now take note, I can only give you a few tips about what can be done, but there are specific strategies for each child to help them with their specific needs. First is prepare your child in advance when changing positions and break down steps into achievable ones. Grade the activity and build up to your child's tolerance of movement gradually. Allow your child to lead the activity at their own pace to avoid adverse reactions. And lastly, use stories on what to expect in different situations or scenarios. Next is incorporate movement activities in your daily routine and give regular movement breaks. Allow your child to sit on a therapy ball when doing tabletop activities and do heavy work activities. Proprioception is one of the strongest systems of our body. And lastly, do water play, Play-Doh activities, explore different textures, dress up in different clothing, use sensory bins, and lastly, getting things into their mouth as early as possible. One sign is when they avoid putting things into their mouth. Now, by doing this, you will help them desensitize. Now remember, advocate for your own child, go see a doctor, and seek consultation from an OT. I hope this video was helpful. Thanks for listening. So if you're really interested, you can contact me through my email. I can help you with that. And please follow me through all my social media platforms. Now, if you like this video, please smash the like button, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more content like this. Thank you and have a good day.